Hello and welcome to Responsible Government Contracting. This workshop is part 2 of a 3-part series introducing government contracting. Today, Mr. Andy Bennett will discuss researching and finding opportunities with the government. Thank you, and find us on the web at nc-rgc.com.
We're going through part 2 today, which is the research phase. So part 1, we talk about registration. Part 2, we talk about research. And then part 3, we're going to talk about responding to those government contracts, those government proposals. So like she said, if you miss anything, or if you have any questions that don't kind of make sense, just catch it in the next cycle and we'll go through it. There's so much going on in this space, in the public sector space, that I cannot possibly cover everything in an hour. So try and break it up into workshops that are a little manageable like that. So first things first, I always ask for, especially in this workshop, in the research one, I'm going to go through the actual websites to actually look at opportunities and show you real time how to actually find opportunities. So whoever kind of chimes in first on the chat with their line of business, I will use you as my guinea pig today, as my example test case business. If not, I'm going to defer to janitorial services is usually what I go with. So think about it. If you want me to use your business as my test case today and kind of get a free insight as to what kind of opportunities are out there, I'll use you. Just put your business type, what kind of industry you're in the chat. Okay, so without further ado, that's my contact information there. I think I've left it up enough on the screen. I'll put it up on the end. Also, if you reach out, just let me know that you're coming through the HCC, and I'll make sure to just help you out there. So like I said, today we're going to talk about research in the public sector. So what does that mean? Government. I'm going to talk today primarily about federal contracting, federal acquisitions, federal procurement. The state level, municipalities, cities, schools, they follow similar processes. In fact, big companies follow similar processes. So if you understand how to navigate the waters and follow the guidelines in the federal space, you're probably dealing with the biggest gorilla in the room. So you'll be able to use those tips and tricks for other agencies and other state customers as well. So today, like I said, we're talking about research, and in order to research, you kind of have to get yourself in the head of the person who's posting. So sales 101, understand your audience. In government sector, I've been doing this for about 21 years now. I think of these people in buckets, in kind of categories, if you will. So I call it the 4 legs of the table. So those 4 legs of the table are these guys up here. We're going to start with finance, because they sit in the back, and I kind of use the hats here to make it a little bit more fun. So the finance guys, and we're going to fast forward through this because I really go into detail on this in part 1. So the finance guys do not make decisions in the acquisitions process. They are not part of the buying process. They help you with getting your invoices processed once you have the award, and that's behind you. So finance people advise the commander, who we'll talk about next, but the finance people are really there to help you as a small business owner get your invoices paid. 99 times out of 100, when I talk to a client or a small business owner who's frustrated with government business, they are that way. They are frustrated because they don't think they're going to get paid on time. They don't think they're going to get their invoices paid. They think that's going to be a slow pay. They think there's going to be issues with that. Well, the finance people are there to help. And what I find from my experience is typically, and I hate to pass the buck here, but typically if the small business does not submit the invoice correctly, and the government gets to define what correctly is. So if the small business does not submit the invoice correctly, then that invoice may not even be seen. And if it's seen, it might be seen by the wrong person. And if it's seen by the right person, it's possibly going to get rejected because it doesn't have the right authorizations. So that's the biggest well, it's one of the biggest complexities, and it's certainly the biggest hang up when I talk to small business owners. Well, light at the end of the tunnel there is that why I'm wearing this silly hat. The finance people are there. That is their job. And every single contract I've ever seen, which has been many, 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 there are always two individuals named, their actual name, their phone number, and their email address is listed on the contract for points of contact to help with that invoicing process. And these contract documents can be very, very long. So you have to kind of know what you're looking for there. But the invoice people's job are there to help you get paid. So don't get frustrated by that. That's what the finance people are there to help with. We are not going to talk to them so much in the sales capacity. Just know that they exist and they're there to help you. The next people, I'm in Tampa. So one of the things we have in Tampa, if you're not from here, is Gasparilla. So I'm going with the nautical theme here with, the pirate hat. The person in charge of the boat, of the ship, is the captain. So this is the hat I'm going with, style in here, I know. So as in the Navy, the person in charge of that ship is called the captain of the boat. The commander, the boss, the secretary, the director, the agency head, whatever that person's job title is, there's going to be somebody in charge. And whatever the level of the organization that you're talking about, there's going to be somebody in charge. So if that's a department or an office lead, they're going to have a boss at their headquarters level, and so on all the way up to the president. We're talking about the commander, the boss, the person in charge of whatever the organization is at whatever level that you are trying to sell to. Okay, so their job is to set the tone and set what's called mission type direction to their organization. And again, whatever level that organization is. So the Secretary of Defense, for example, sets the tone for the entire Defense Department, the entire military. The Secretary of Education will set the tone for all of Department of Education, and so on. The director of FEMA, however, is not going to set the tone for the Army. They're just going to set the tone for FEMA, and they're going to set those objectives for FEMA. So they're going to focus on their agency. And that filters all the way down to, MacDill Air Force Base, the 6th Contracting Squadron, right? So that's an office that the boss, the commander of that organization, sets the tone for their little, their box of sand. So that commander, however, different from commercial, different from business, the commander does not have the authority to sign contracts. The boss is not authorized. They're not a signature authority for that organization. They set the tone. That's important to understand the distinction. So if you're trying to sell to an organization, sure, it's great to know the boss. It's great to go talk to and have FaceTime with the boss. But they are not going to be the ultimate decision. They're going to set the direction, but they're not going to be the ultimate decision maker. Now we start getting into the decision makers here. So the first one up, and I'm over on the right side of the screen here up in the top. The end user is going to be critical for this process. So I like to use a hard hat because construction is kind of easy to visualize. The construction example, the end user is going to be the foreman, the superintendent. They're going to be the owner's rep if you're really into construction. So they're going to be the one that is boots on the ground. They're in the thick of it. They know the details of the requirement of the work that's actually going to be done. And if that's construction, or if that's IT, or if that's janitorial services, it doesn't matter. There is going to be somebody in the government, on the customer side, on the government side, that's going to have full comprehension of the work that needs to be done. It's going to be their requirement. Okay, so that end user, other job titles that they may hear, that you may hear associated with them, project manager, program manager, mission partner, end user, obviously. Those are the type of people that we're talking about. Those are more operationally focused people, right? So they're looking out at the work that's being done. What's of interest to them? If you're thinking, sales and research and what we're talking about today, why do we care about these guys? Well, if I'm building construction, right? If I'm doing construction, these are the people that are going to decide if we need, 15 windows or 10 windows. These are the people that are going to decide if it's drywall or stucco or whatever the options are, right? Whatever the detail specifications are. If I'm in IT, one of the things that they're going to care about is maybe the monitor size of the laptops that they're going to be getting or processing speed. If it's janitorial services, maybe they care if trash gets picked up once a week or once a month. Maybe lawn care. Are you trimming the hedges as well as cutting the grass, or are you just doing that once a month? Right. So those specifications, those requirements are going to be defined by the end user, this person. Okay. That is going to be written down, and everything kind of starts with that conversation between the commander and the end user. Because remember, the commander is giving that broad mission, okay, guys, men, women, we're going to go in this direction for our organization for this coming year. In that room, when the commander is talking, the end users are listening. The project managers are listening. The end users are listening. So what they're doing is they're taking notes. Okay, boss, I get it. You want to go this way. In order to go this way, we need to take a step that way, right? So that step that way, defined by the end user, is called a needs statement. That needs, I need something. That needs statement is going to turn into what's called a statement of work, or a SOW, a statement of work. Sometimes you'll hear that called a performance work statement, or PWS. These are just documents. It's basically the same language. You're just flavoring it differently, okay? So that end user is not buying. But if you are selling something that's specific, that has requirements, that have specifications, then you are going to be you need to be talking to and targeting the end users. I'll go back to the laptop example. If you sell laptops, if you're an IT reseller, you sell laptops. Well, if the latest, greatest processing speed is coming out, and you know that that's your competitive edge, that's your advantage over your competition, well, you want to make darn sure that you have educational calls and inform your customers that, hey guys, this new processing speed, or whatever screen size, or lighter, whatever it is, whatever the thing is that you have that gives you an advantage over your competition, you want to make sure you educate your end user on that conversation, okay? Because what's going to happen is that end user is going to realize, oh, great, there's a 15-inch monitor, and I only thought there were 13-inch monitors. So now in my needs statement, I need 15-inch monitors. So I'm going to put that down as a specification for my requirement. Think through that. If you are the only one that's selling 15-inch monitors, your competition is selling 13-inch monitors, and the end user says, I must have 15-inch monitors, then the requirement is going to be for 15-inch monitors, and you are going to be the only one selling 15-inch monitors. So that's a good sales position to be in, and that's okay. You're allowed to do that because that's educational conversations with the end users. Now we're going to cross a line. This is where you need to be aware of the hats, and this is why I do it this way. One of the reasons. The contracting officer wears a crown for a reason. The contracting officer gets that information from the end user. And now the end user is out of the picture. That end user has done their job. They've defined what their requirement is. And the contracting officer is going to go through the process. All right, so the contracting officer's job is a couple of things. Make sure they mitigate risk for the government. So the government is very, very risk averse. That's why you'll see things like past performance requirements, making sure that you know what you're doing, technical requirements, those kinds of things. We'll talk about those in part 3. But the contracting officer is also very, very interested in making sure that the end user gets what they want, okay? The end user this is a dance between these government people. The end user can't say, I need Andy's company who sells 15-inch monitors, because there might be other companies that sell 15-inch monitors. So what the end user says is, okay, that's a requirement. And this is a little detail here, guys, but it's called salient data points, salient details. The contracting officer is going to look at that requirement and say, okay, I get that they need laptops. I get that they need lawn care. I get that they need trash disposal, whatever the requirement is. But the end user cannot specify who it is that they want done. They just have to say what they need. It's up to the contracting officer to decide who wins. I saved the contracting officer for last because they are the only one that is authorized in the federal government to obligate the government. The contracting officer, if there were a test at the end of this, that would be a test question. The contracting officers are the only ones that have the authority to commit or obligate the government. All right. So now it's in process mode. So now we're in the acquisitions world, because the contracting officer is not an expert on laptops. The contracting officer is not an expert on construction. They don't do that. That's what the end user does. That's their job. What the contracting officer does is they're going to go out and find companies that provide that product or service. So that contracting officer has another factor that they really, really care about. In fact, it's law. It's small business utilization, small business concerns. We're going to talk a lot about small business concerns, but just let me dab into it here a little bit. The federal government has a law, a Small Business Act, actually specifies 23% of the budget must be spent on small companies, total small businesses. I'm going to define that in a second. So those total small businesses are 23% of the total federal budget. Within that category, 5% with woman-owned companies, 5% with minority-owned companies, 3% with veteran-owned companies, and 3% with what's called hub zone, or historically underutilized business zones. So those small business certifications, you have to go through the application, you have to get approved. But once you have that application, once you have that approval, the contracting officers are required to do those percentages of their budget, which in aggregate pulls up to the entire federal budget. They have to do that budget every single year with those categories of small businesses. So if you qualify as a small business, now we're to the punchline. If you qualify as a small business, you need to make darn sure that your contracting officers know that. You need to make darn sure that you're educating your contracting officers. Hey, I'm a small business. I'm a woman-owned WOSB, a woman-owned small business, an EDWOSB, an economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. I'm an 8A company, a minority-owned small business, a service-disabled veteran-owned or veteran-owned small business, either one or both. Those categories are not going to make sense to the end user. Those categories speak to the contracting officer. So again, understand the hat of the person that you're talking to and where their interest lies. So now let me take this off for a second and show you guys a little bit different way to look at things here. The commander and the end user are having that conversation, early in the process. End user is going to take their, multiple project managers are going to take their little piece of the puzzle, define what it is. They're going to hand those requirements over to the contracting officers. The contracting officers are going to do their thing, scrub out any, silliness. We need Andy's company. No, you don't need Andy's company. You just need 15-inch monitors. Others may sell 15-inch monitors. So let's, scrub that down. And then they're going to go through the process. Once that happens, this conversation stops. All communications are formal. Okay. We're going to talk about this more later. But what that means is just don't pick up the phone and call your contracting officer, email everything to them. They have to document, think insider trading, right? So any question about an opportunity that the contracting officer gets, they're going to take out the name of the person who asked it, and they're going to consolidate all of those questions together, and they're going to make sure everybody has a fair opportunity to see those questions and the answers to them. So it's a level playing field. It's a contracting officer's job to make sure it's a level playing field for the competition. And then that industry conversation, the contracting officer is having that conversation with industry. Let me pause. This is a good point to pause, see if you guys have any questions on what I've talked about so far. Okay. Excuse me. So let's keep rolling here, and let me show this a little bit differently as well. You're going to go out and Google some of this stuff. And one of the things that, and I encourage you to, because this is, most of this information, you just kind of have to know what you're looking for. The Small Business Administration is wonderful. They do lots and lots of great things. But what they are doing is educating. What they are not doing is awarding contracts, right? So it's not their job to award all of the Army's contracts. It's the Small Business Administration's job to make sure that these kinds of rules are put in place and that they are applied, right? So that 5%, the 23%, those utilization goals we just talked about. They will also, some of these organizations, and actually PTAC just recently changed to accelerators. So if you do a Google search now, they're kind of in the transition period now. So if you do a search for PTAC, it's going to show you accelerators, Apex accelerators. So just understand that that's a transition here. SCORE, SBDC, Small Business Development Centers. PTAC was procurement, technical assistance centers. So those are offices, those are parts of Small Business Administration that can help. They basically are teaching what I'm educating you on right now. They'll help you kind of through that process. But understand also, those are government, looking at it from the government's perspective, not from the business perspective. They're trying to help. They're definitely there to help. Use them as resources as much as you can. Just understand that they're free and they're government and they're there for everybody. Please use them as you can. On the other side, I just picked a random agency. I just picked FEMA. And I'm illustrating here that there are different parts. Not everybody has just a government email address. So you can kind of see where the people sit based on their email addresses and what organizations they work for. You kind of have to dig more deeply to figure out what hat they wear, where they sit at the table. If you look at Jane Doe at the top here, where do you think she is? Well, she's the commander. She's the boss of that organization. Whether it's FEMA or an office within FEMA, she's the person in charge. So she's setting that broad intent, that broad direction. On down, we've got the contracting officer, Lucy, we've got the commanders, and we've got the end users down there, down at the bottom, Tim. So that's kind of what this looks like. There may be different contracting officers it's not a one-to-one. They don't all drink water at the same cooler. So the contracting officers may be in a different location than the end users. Another one I want to call out here is John Smith. This is not a real person. So don't email John Smith, because that's not a real person. But what John Smith illustrates here is what's called a small business advocate. SBA is a different organization than FEMA. But within FEMA, within Department of Army, within Army Corps of Engineers, within Air Mobility Command, within Department of Education, within the FBI, whatever organization that you're dealing with, whatever office, most of the time, whatever office you're dealing with, they're going to have a small business advocate. Those small business concerns, those small business goals that I told you about are so critical. They are law. It's not a regulation or a policy, it's law that the government has actually established funded government people whose job it is to advocate inside the government, inside that office, to use small businesses. These are your gatekeepers. Said differently, these are your doors. These are your entrees into that office. Google the heck out of this. They might have different job titles: small business advisor, small business advocate, office of small and disadvantaged business utilization. They're mouthfuls, I know, but that's kind of what the job title is. Their job, because the contracting officer has to use small businesses, the small business advocate will usually sit right next to a bunch of contracting officers and say, hey, I have these contracting officers, or vice versa. The contracting officer will come to the small business advocate and say, hey, I'm doing janitorial services requirement. Do you have any small businesses that do janitorial services? So it benefits you to have an open conversation with your small business advocates. We're going to talk about how to use that to your advantage in the next class, in the next workshop here. But the punchline there, if you're not able to make it, is come educated to that conversation. Know, in this case, know what FEMA's mission is, know what they do, and don't come with a hand out and expect them to just award you contracts because you're a magical small business. There's lots of small businesses. So you have to be educated, you have to know what they do, know what you can bring to the table to help them, and then do some research to find out what kind of opportunities they are either actively seeking or have sought in the past, and you can help them. Hey, Mr. Mrs. Small Business Advocate, I understand that this is your mission. I do this piece of that larger mission. I understand that, contracting officer Jill, Jane, and Jack have done that type of work before. I would very much appreciate an introduction to whoever else in your office might be interested in this. Here's my capability statement. All right. That's kind of how that conversation goes, at least initially, and then you take it from there. Okay, so that's some of the people. Now let's talk about the process. Excuse me. Allergies are kicking my butt this week. Okay, so this is the process. Scary. Don't freak out. This is the process if they're going to buy battleships. This is the process if they're going to build new aircraft carriers. There is one process. It is the same process across the board. How many pieces and steps of that process, and this is just a representation of it, how many pieces of that process they decide to use is defined by how big the effort is. Okay, so there are certain thresholds, and $10 million, $50 million, billions of dollars, right? But $150,000, $10,000. You can forget about this process if it's under $10,000. If it's under $150,000, it has to go to a small business, right? So there are different thresholds that benefit you as a small business. So understanding that helps you with that conversation with contracting officers. But just so we know what we're talking about here, those budget objectives, said differently, that's the mission type orders, right? So that's that conversation with the commander. Those are going out formally. The first step is the request for information and sources sought. We're going to see these in about a minute or two here when we start actually looking at the websites. Request for information, or RFI, or sources sought, is where the contracting officer is shopping. They don't know what's out there yet. They don't know what companies do what they need yet. They might not even have a fully formulated thought of what the requirement is yet. But they're starting to look for options. They're starting to look for, okay, tell me about this. Tell me about this thing. If I sell markers, okay, the RFI might look like, okay, tell me about writing utensils, broad strokes, broad interest here. Industry days, that's usually for a more complex thing where if it's such a nuanced, such a detailed kind of thing, they may bring people together, even, post-COVID. They may bring people together either virtually or in person. You have to sign up for those and do a Q&A, questions and answers, or discussions. Usually what that'll look like is the government will present what the idea is, what the concept is, and then industry will be sitting out in the audience. All right, so that's an industry day. Draft RFP is just what it sounds like, draft. It's a draft. It's a test of the request for proposal. This is when we start getting into the formal requirements. This is their first approach. Okay, I did my research. Now I'm going to write down what the actual requirement is. It's going to change. It could potentially change, though, because it's a draft. Then the request for proposal, we start getting into the actual decision-making process, and then they go through the award. All of those orals, discussions, BAFO, best and final offer, all of those are just incremental steps as they start to weed down, the competitive pool. And then they'll shut the doors and it'll just be government, and that'll be a closed conversation with just government. They'll do what's called source selection, and that's when they make the decision of who gets the award. Contracting officer ultimately decides, but they will take advice and input from everybody. So, question, if you're a small business, where should you at least primarily focus your efforts? Well, sure, respond to opportunities, but you're kind of late to the game if you're just responding to RFPs. So what I recommend is take a hard look at RFIs, requests for information, and sources sought. Why? Because if you're a contracting officer, put yourself, let's zen contracting officers here for a second. What's going on in the contracting officer's head? Okay, I've got this requirement. I don't really know too much about it because I'm not the construction guy. I'm an acquisitions person. So I need to find out. So I'm going to do some research. Okay, so that's part of the RFI process. But I also need to satisfy my small business concerns. Okay, great. So part of that RFI and sources sought. Now it's starting to click. Part of that is the contracting officer saying, hey, who of you out here can do this type of work, and tell me if you're a small business. So if you're a small business, you darn sure need to respond to these RFIs and sources sought, because that law is so powerful. It actually allows contracting officers to set aside competition for just small businesses. So if you do janitorial services and you respond as a woman-owned small business to that requirement, and there have to be at least two, it's called the rule of two. Another woman-owned small business responds to that contracting officer, which you won't know about. You both respond to this RFI. There's not pricing involved. This is just your resume, maybe some questions. This is just high-level stuff. So you respond to that RFI. The contracting officer says, ooh, I have two woman-owned small businesses that can do this thing. I'm now going to put that competition aside. Only woman-owned small businesses can compete for this work. So you are no longer competing against the 750,000 companies that are registered in sam.gov. You are now only competing against other woman-owned small businesses, or minority-owned small businesses, or veteran-owned, or whatever category that contracting officer decides. So it very, very much benefits you as a small business to respond with your small business designation called out, put it on your capability statement, respond with your capability statement to those RFIs and sources sought. Okay, so now we're going to start digging into the NUG work here. How am I finding these opportunities, and what kinds of things actually make a difference? If you haven't heard me talk about NAICS codes from part 1, this is where I'm going to introduce it to you. So the North American Industry Classification System, I call it NAICS, some pronounce it NIACS, however you pronounce it, I'm going to call it NAICS. So the NAICS code is, just do a Google search for NAICS.com. So that's a really good website that I like to use. So the NAICS code is going to tell you, that's that 6-digit number that tells you what type of business you're in. If you're a locksmith, it's 561622. If you're in landscaping, it's 561730. These are the different types of opportunities that are, that they're posted under. The contracting officer can only pick one NAICS code for each opportunity that's posted. So if you're an electrician, think construction. If you're an electrician, or you're a plumber, or you're a carpenter, is that contracting officer that's building a building going to call out that entire construction project for electrical NAICS code? Probably not. It's probably going to be listed under like a general construction kind of NAICS code. So you need to know your business and understand how that contracting officer is going to see that, and which NAICS codes they're going to pick, because that's how we're going to research. So stick a pin in that for a second. The next thing to know is, how does that define what your small business category is, if you are a small business or not? Well, this is the small business size standards. Just so the Google term here is SBA, Small Business Administration, SBA, Small Business Size Standards, SBA Small Business Size Standards. When you do that, you're going to see a document that looks like this, lots and lots. There's 1,300 of them. Okay, there we go. We've got our guinea pig here. I'm going to pull you up in a second, so stick with me. Okay, so in the first column, that's gross revenue. So that's what defines your night. That's what defines if you're a small business. For example, if I'm in janitorial services and I did less than $19.5 million gross revenue, running average for the past 5 years. So 5 years in the rear, running average of gross revenue. If you're at $19.5 million or more, you have graduated. You are no longer a small business. If you are under that threshold, then you are a small business. If this column, and notice there's only one or the other, if you're in this column over here to the right, environmental remediation services. If you have 751 employees, W-2 employees, then you are no longer a small business. If you have 749 employees, you are still considered a small business. It's not fair to compare a gold miner to a soybean farmer to a dog groomer. So that's why they do this. There are different definitions for what is small. And this is how the government defines, this is the answer. There's not another answer. This is the answer. So if you are small, yes or no, and you can be in multiple categories and be small in some and not in others. So those are nuances to this. Okay, so why does that matter? Because if you are selling chairs, well, I may see that thing that's on the screen there as 337214 NAICS code. Great, wonderful. I'm going to go out and search that NAICS code. Well, if I'm only searching that NAICS code and I'm not searching any other NAICS codes, I'm not going to find the contracting officer that sees it differently or another one that sees it differently than that. It is the contracting officer's decision of what NAICS code they pick for that opportunity, for that effort. So you need to think like them, because if you're in janitorial services and you're searching for what you think is the only NAICS code for janitorial services, you're going to find that one. You're going to find that one, but you're not going to find this one because it's not in the search that you're doing. All right. So now we're talking about research. I'm going to get out of this screen here and we're going to go to sam.gov. And actually, I am not going to try and butcher your name, but you are my guinea pig. So I'm going to go to my website here, not my website, but the website, NAICS, if I can spell today, .com. Oh, yeah, I can't spell today. There we go. Oh, that's not it then. North American Industry Classification System.com. There we go. Okay, so this is what, once you get there, this is what it looks like. So when you get here, I do this code search in here, and there are SIC codes and, there are PCS codes and different things that you can use, but I stick with NAICS codes. That's what I find most contracting officers use. That's what they're required to use. Sometimes they use something else in addition to it. So I'm just going to use your own words. So you're in decorating and rentals. All right, so let's do decorating and rentals. Let's see what pops. So I just type in the keyword search, and this is the laundry list of NAICS codes that pops up. There's a bunch. I don't know which one apply. Whoa, that's big. I'm IT challenge today, guys. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to look through here. If I'm you, I'm going to look through here and pick, again, put your contracting officer hat on. And I need to find something to classify this effort on. I'd pick the 5, 10, not more than 15. I'd pick the 5 or 10 that kind of most closely align with you. Okay. And if you don't, we can do some keyword searching also and kind of hone in what, kind of look at what the trends are. So if you see one, then let me know, but I'm not seeing anything that's completely jumping out at me. So let's just leave this because that's kind of manufacturing. You're not really manufacturing. Rental, leasing, equipment rental, maybe, but that's not really, that's more construction flavor. So let's leave that alone. Let's pause that for a second. So now we're going to go to the actual website. I'm going to pivot. We're going to spend the last 15 minutes or so on the actual website here to see the research phase. This is sam.gov. Not another, there are lots of other sites that you can pay for. It's going to pull the same information from here. And once you start getting on contracts, like GSA is one, SOUP is, there are other contract vehicles that you can get on. Sam.gov is safe. This is the baseline. It's free. It's not the easiest to work with, which is why I'm going to walk you through it. But this is free, and you can go out and search for it anytime you want to. This is what PTAC and SBDCs, these are what those guys are gonna point you to. So I've already done this stuff, and I'm not gonna spend time talking about it here because we already talked about it in part 1. If you missed it, join back next month, part 1. So I've already set up my login.gov. I'm logging in. I'm doing my 2-factor authentication here. So now I'm in. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you guys' benefit. So I'm going to go up here to search. Click on search, and feel free to screenshot this as I go through this filter here. So I am going to use, I'm going to focus on keyword searching for a second. So I'm going to take his keyword search of decorating and rentals. I'm just going to put that straight into the search, and let's just do a wildcard and see what happens. Okay, so nothing back. So let's do, I'm going to clear that. And I'm going to start actually filtering. So let's do rentals. But there's something going on here, and there might be, and actually they might be having an issue today. Government website, so wah-wah. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to expand this section here at the top that shows select domain, all domains. I'm going to expand that. I'm going to make sure I'm looking at contract opportunities. I'm going to select that one. Then I'm going to see if, let's just do the janitorial services, just to see if the website is actually having issues. Janitor. Yeah, we're having some issues here today. Let's try it again. Sometimes you got to do this because, I mean, the websites are a little bit flaky sometimes. So let's do cleaning, just something generic. Yeah, so we're having issues. So there's some authentication issues going on. So what you will be able to do, and I'm not able to do it right now because the website's having some issues, but let me just kind of show you what it looks like. So this side here, if I expand contract opportunities and I select here contract opportunities, main domain, I'm going to go down here and look at some of the options I have. And if you're doing Amazon.com or you're doing Google or whatever it is, you're going to see different options for your filters. This is nothing more than that. So as you start going through here, you have to pick the kinds of things you care about. Maybe I care about federal organizations. It gets kind of weird when the government starts buying, though, because the contracting officer and the end user may work for different parts of the government. The Army may be buying on behalf of the Air Force, or NASA may be buying on behalf of Department of Education. So if you're looking for a federal organization, and also applies for place of performance, that contracting officer, remember, these are human beings. So that contracting officer may be putting in their location and their organization, but you don't want where the contracting officer sits, you want where the end user, where the work is actually being performed. So be careful with that. I usually leave those blank. The dates, however, responses due. If it takes you a month, or if it takes you a couple of days to respond, then you may want to put a range in. If today's the 8th, you don't want efforts that are going to be due today because you don't have time to respond to them. But maybe you can quick turn something for tomorrow. And then you can put it out, okay, responses that are due. I'm not going to care about things that are so far in the future because that's too far outside of my window. So let's go into the summertime, and I'll go out to the end of July. So that was under dates, and I selected custom, right? Notice type. This goes back to that slideshow. What matters on that notice type? Well, sources sought. We looked at that, right? That's one of those early ones that I want to respond to. Pre-solicitation is that umbrella that covered a lot of that stuff up front. So I'm going to add that as well. Consolidated bundle. We can do that one, sure. Solicitation. I don't want award notice, but I do want combined solicitation synopsis. I'm going to zoom out here in a second so you guys can actually do a screenshot to save yourself some heartache here, but those are the ones that I would recommend. This is where, if you know the NAICS code that you're looking for, you can plug it in here. If you don't, then just stick with the keyword search up at the top. So the NAICS code, and again, PSC codes, like I said before, you can use those as you see fit. Down below, we're going to start doing set aside. This, be careful. There's a bunch of these. These are some of the ones that I listed, but be careful here, because if you're looking for an opportunity and that contracting officer is doing their job and going through the RFI sources sought phase, and you focus on woman-owned small businesses, but the contracting officer has not yet determined if that effort is going to be set aside at all, let alone a woman-owned small business. You are going to be taking off the table all of those RFIs that you could respond to just because you're only focused on woman-owned small business opportunities. So I recommend leave that alone, leave that blank for the set-aside category, just for your initial search. Place of performance, like I said, you can't be sure if the contracting officer is putting their location or the end user's location. An awardee, this is helpful if you're looking for like a post award, if you want to be added to a contract after somebody won it, that's a strategy. But I obviously like to leave those blank as well. So let me zoom out. I'll show you what some of these actual opportunities look like, because the website seems to be having an issue. Go ahead and take a screenshot of that if you like. I'll leave that up for a second. And then I'll bring the slide deck back up and I'll show you what some of these actually look like. Okay, 3, 2, 1. All right. So now I'm going to go back to the slide deck here, and let me show you these here. So you can see all I did was screenshot some of the opportunities that are showing up that are, if we weren't having IT issues, that were going to show up on that website. So general information, they're all going to look the same. That's the punch. That's the point here. You have to get used to what they look like so that you can get through them very, very quickly. Get quickly able to say, no, that's not interesting to me. Move on. Don't try and make yourself fit into that wedge, right? So focus only on the ones that you think are of interest to you, and then read the documents. I'll fast forward a little bit on for part 3 here, but this is what some of those actually look like in the document. So on that site that we were looking at, we're find the opportunities, the documentation, the statements of work and whatnot are going to be on there. And this is what some of them look like. So it tells you what the details of the work to be done are, and it goes through exactly what the requirements are that they're expecting you to answer. If you don't meet the requirements or you're not able to satisfy those, then move on, get past it. If you can and you do, then save it And if that's, if you follow, if you tag it, or if you write down that number, whatever you do, that notice ID is what's going to be interesting to you. And that's what you're going to use to reference. So that notice ID is what it's called. That notice ID is what you're going to use to refer to. That's the identification number for that opportunity. That's going to stay the same throughout the process. So if that's an Excel spreadsheet, if that's on a whiteboard, whatever it is, just keep note of that and follow that through the process, because there will be changes. There will be updates, there will be amendments, there will be questions and answers. You just have to stay on top of that if that affects your pricing. Okay, so a couple minutes left. Let me open it up for questions and see what kind of questions you guys have. You guys have any questions? There we go.
So I missed the first half, probably the majority of the session, but did you talk about how to identify NAICS that may not fit just by name under what your services may be?
Yeah, so that is about you knowing your business. So you have to know what it is that you do, and then how to kind of draw circles around that of how other people may see that. So if I use the example of the chair, let me pull it back up. If you are, if you are selling chairs, you need to look at that chair and not stop at office furniture. Because if you're only focused on office furniture, you're only going to get the business of the contracting officers that agree with you, that see it as office furniture. So one of those tools is that website, Nikes.com. There are lots of them. You can, just Google search Nikes codes and just read the description of the. Let me pull it back up. Or Nikes.com. Like the gentleman who's on, he said he's in decorating and rentals. Well, I don't know off the top of my head what that is. So I'm going to go to this, one or other websites like this and just keyword search it. And then I'm going to spend some time, because this is very, very important. This is very, very important for you to know and to identify what that is. Read through some of these and see what makes sense to you. And then when you're doing your research, if you're not finding opportunities that meet that, then try different ones, or just try the keyword search and then figure out, okay, I keyword searched. I did a keyword search and I found these 3 opportunities. So I'm going to start using, where are my opportunities go? Yeah, here we go. So I did keyword searching for janitorial services. I found these 3 opportunities that popped up. So now I know that 561720 and 562910 are how at least some contracting officers see janitorial services. So I kind of reversed it, right? So do some keyword searching, do some outside researching, figure out what kind of matches, and then test it. Try do some searching and see if the types of opportunities that result are the type of work that you want. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right, guys. Any other last questions? Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you for your time today. We hope this workshop was instructive and informative. Please find additional accredited courses and other support services on our website at nc-rgc.com